I have told this story maybe 200 times, in warm rooms to people who wanted to be entertained. I have watched their faces while I talked. They lean in at the same places. They laugh at the same places. And they never once believe the part that matters. So let me start with the part nobody believes. 61 days into the siege of Tallow Station, I ran a standard medical intake scan on a human male, 34 years old, and the machine told me he had no governor. Not a damaged governor. Not a governor that had been surgically removed, which is a crime under 19 separate treaties, and which I would have been required to report before I finished the sentence. None, never installed. The socket at the base of the skull where every civilized soldier in the known galaxy carries the small gray device that shuts them off before their body destroys itself. That space, in him, was just meat and bone, and a small mole he'd probably had since he was a child. I called my supervisor over. I remember my hands were shaking so hard the scanner kept losing its lock. The human, whose name was Corporal Boatsang, watched me shake. He had a food ration in one hand. He was chewing. He said, "You okay, little guy?" That's the part nobody believes. Not the missing governor, not the 41 of them against what came later. The part nobody believes is that he was worried about me. You need to understand where we were, otherwise none of it lands right. Belarrow is a moon, not a nice one. It orbits a gas giant called Hesper, which is the color of an old bruise and takes up a third of the sky at all times, so you never really get night. You get a long purple dimness where the light comes at you sideways and nothing casts a shadow in the right direction. Belarrow has water, which is why anybody cared, and it has the ladder, which is why everybody cared. The ladder was an orbital tether. 280 kilometers of braided monofilament running from the top of a dead volcano straight up into a docking spine, and everything that moved between Belarrow's surface and the rest of the coalition supply web moved through it. It hummed. On still days you could hear it from 30 kilometers out, a low note under everything, like somebody holding down the bottom key on an instrument and never letting go. Tallow Station was the town at the base. 14,000 people before the war, 9,000 when I got there, 4,000 by the 61st day, and most of those were soldiers. And the ash. I have to tell you about the ash, because I still dream about it, and in the dream I never once see a face, I only see the ash coming down. Hesper's magnetic field does something to Belarrow's crust that geologists explained to me twice, and I never understood. What it means practically is that the volcanoes are never fully asleep. They breathe. And when the Vaunt started dropping heavy ordnance into the northern range, the volcanoes stopped breathing and started coughing, and everything within 400 kilometers got ash. Not fluffy ash, not the kind in stories. This was grit. Fine gray grit with tiny glass edges in it, and it came down constantly, and it got into your throat, your seals, your food, the hinges of doors, the works of every weapon anyone had ever designed. It made the light strange. It made everyone cough in the same rhythm so that a barracks at night sounded like an animal with something caught in it. By day 61 we had all stopped noticing that we were gray. Our uniforms were gray, our skin was gray, the ration cans were gray. When somebody new arrived you could tell instantly because they still had color, and everybody would stare at them, and within a day the ash would take the color and they'd disappear into the rest of us. That's why I remember what the humans looked like when they came down. They had color for about 6 hours. My name is Kevu Tamrel. I was, at the time, 22 standard, which for a Selshiri is old enough to be trusted with equipment and too young to be trusted with opinions. I want to be clear about what I was because people always upgrade me when they retell it. I was not a soldier. I was not a hero. I was a wire runner attached to Coalition Auxiliary Medical, which meant 2 jobs. When medical needed a physical data line laid between 2 points, I laid it. And when medical needed somebody to run a scanner over incoming bodies, I ran it. Selshiri are small. chest high on most species, damp-skinned, and we don't take heat well, which is a joke of the universe considering where I ended up. We're also very good in tight spaces, and we have excellent hearing, which is why so many of us end up crawling through service conduits with a spool on our back while somebody screams at us over a radio. I had laid, by day 61, roughly 9 kilometers of line under Tallow Station. I knew that town the way you know the inside of your own mouth. The sound of every stairwell, which service hatches would freeze shut, which alley you did not walk down after a bombardment because of what was still in it. 61 days. I want you to sit with that number. 2 months of a siege in which the Vaunt did not once attempt a full assault. They shelled us. They cut our water. They flew low over the town so the sonic wash broke windows and eardrums and people's nerve. They dropped leaflets, actual physical leaflets, which was somehow the most insulting part. They were waiting for us to break, because that is how war works. That is how it has always worked for everybody, for 11,000 years of recorded interstellar contact. Let me explain the governor now, since it's the whole story. Every sapient species that made it into space made it there by not dying stupidly. That's the short version. The long version, somewhere in the evolutionary history of nearly every species that developed technology, the brain developed a hard limit. When the body's damage signals cross a threshold, enough pain, enough blood loss, enough oxygen debt, enough sheer terror, the higher functions release. You go down. You stop. It's not cowardice, it's plumbing. The organism protects the organism. Different species express it differently. My people, the Selshiri, go into what we call the still water. We drop, our skin goes pale, our breathing slows to almost nothing. Looks like death, isn't. A Vaunt Harrow trooper goes rigid and their carapace clamps shut. A Dennick goes limp and their eyes turn white. A Morkal simply falls asleep, mid-sentence, mid-step, and cannot be woken for 6 hours. Everyone does it, everyone. So when species started fighting wars in space, wars where you needed a soldier to keep functioning past the drop point for tactical reasons, the obvious solution was the governor, a small device at the top of the spine. It doesn't remove the limit. The treaties are extremely clear about that, and the treaties exist because of some genuinely horrifying experiments in the 4th millennium. It manages the limit. It reads your body's damage load and it gives you a window. 15 seconds, 30, 90, depending on grade and rank. Enough to reach cover, enough to pull a friend out, enough to finish the shot. And then when the window closes, it puts you down, cleanly, gently, so that you wake up in a medical bay instead of dying on your feet. That's what a governor is. It's mercy in a box. Every soldier in the coalition has one. Every soldier in the Vaunt Compact has one, and theirs are crueler, longer window, but they have them. The whole architecture of galactic warfare, every doctrine, every casualty model, every siege calculation ever run assumes that when you hurt an enemy enough, the enemy stops. 61 days of shelling. The Vaunt weren't trying to kill Tallow Station. They were waiting for the whole garrison to fall over. Now the legends. You have to understand that we had heard of humans. That's the thing people always get wrong when they tell this story back to me. They imagine we opened a hatch and beheld the unknown. No, humans had been in the coalition for about 90 years. There were human freighter crews. There were human agricultural consultants on 9 worlds I could name. There was a human woman who sold noodles 2 streets from my mother's house, and everybody agreed her broth was too salty, and everybody ate there anyway. We knew humans. Humans were fine. Humans were a mid-tier member species with unremarkable technology, a reputation for being loud, and a tendency to bring their animals everywhere. What we didn't believe were the archives. There was a war 300 and some years before I was born, in a part of the arm nobody goes to anymore. Humans were in it early, before the coalition really knew them. And the after-action records from that war are, I've read them since, all of them. Every night for a while there, they are strange. They describe soldiers advancing through fire that should have dropped them. They describe a boarding action where the defenders should have stopped functioning 9 minutes before they did. They describe an officer, name redacted, who kept giving orders for 40 minutes with a wound. The report describes in clinical language that I will not repeat, and the report notes, in the flat way of reports, that this was observed by multiple witnesses and is not believed to be an error. And for 300 years, the consensus of every serious academy on every serious world was, those records are propaganda, wartime exaggeration, morale documents. Humans were new, humans were useful, somebody in a communications office decided to make them frightening, and the myth got into the water supply. There was a whole genre of popular entertainment based on it. The Unstoppables. Terrible dramas where a human took 9 wounds and kept walking, and everyone in the audience laughed, because it was fun, because it was silly, because everyone knows a body has a limit and you cannot argue with plumbing. I had watched those dramas. As a child, with my brother, we used to imitate them, staggering around the courtyard going ag and refusing to fall down, until my mother told us to stop because it was disrespectful to the dead. I want you to hold both of those things at once. That's the only way to understand Day 61. We knew humans, and we did not believe in humans, both, at the same time. The relief drop came at 400 on Day 61, which is the exact hour the Vaunt gunners changed shift, which means somebody in orbit had done their homework. I was on the medical pad. I was always on the medical pad. 9 of us stood there in the dark under the ash tarps with our scanners and our stretchers, waiting to receive whatever the coalition had scraped together and thrown at us, and every one of us was thinking the same thing, which was, not enough. We'd been told 2,000. Then the ship came through the ash. It was ugly. I want to be precise about this because everybody who tells this story afterward makes the human ship beautiful, and it was not beautiful. It was an insult. It was a Cormorant-class Roughlander, which is a hull design so old it predates the Coalition's standard docking clamp, and it had been patched in 11 different places with 11 different alloys, so that it came down through the ash like a rock somebody had wrapped in trash. The braking burn was so bad we felt it in our teeth. It landed hard, the struts screamed. And painted on the nose, in white, in a script I couldn't read, was a name that our liaison later translated as Grandma's fault. The ramp dropped, ash blew in. 41 humans walked out. I want to give you the number again, 41. Behind me, someone from logistics said, out loud in front of everyone, "Is there another ship?" There was not another ship. They looked wrong immediately. Their gear was old, not badly maintained. I could see the maintenance. The seals were clean. The couplings had been recently greased, but old. Ballistic weapons. Actual ballistic weapons in the year I was living in, with brass cases and a mechanical action and no ranging assist whatsoever. Their armor was ceramic composite over a body-conforming underlayer, which the Coalition had stopped issuing 4 decades ago because ceramic doesn't self-repair. They carried too much. That's the thing I noticed as a wire runner, a person whose whole job is weight management in confined spaces. They were carrying an absurd amount of mass on their bodies, 40, 50 kilos each, and they carried it like people who had made peace with it a long time ago. And they had brought a machine. It walked down the ramp last, 6-legged, about the size of a large table, painted in that same white script. It carried what I first took to be a crew-served weapon and was in fact 11 crates of ammunition, a water purifier, 2 field ovens, and a folded structure that turned out to be a canvas awning. Somebody had painted a face on the front of it, 2 eyes and a smile. Somebody had also welded a metal flower to the antenna mount. "That's Adeline," a human said to me later when I asked. "She's a mule. Don't stand behind her, she doesn't have a rear sensor and she'll back over your foot." The Coalition had walkers, beautiful ones. Full-spectrum sensor suites, adaptive gait, tactical AI, silent as breathing. The humans had a machine named Odeline, with a face painted on her, and no rear sensor. I remember thinking, very clearly, standing in the ash at 400 on day 61, we are going to lose this moon. I was assigned to them. Not because of any grand plan. Because I was small, because I was a wire runner, and because the Coalition's translation matrix for Terran Standard was 2 software revisions behind, and the human company had exactly 1 soldier who spoke fluent trade, and someone in staff decided that meant medical needed a liaison who could handle the interface directly. So on the morning of day 61, I walked into the Western warehouse where they'd billeted the humans, carrying my scanner and my intake tablet, with instructions to run full medical baselines on all 41 so that Coalition Medical would know what to do with them when they got hurt. The warehouse was the coldest building in Tallow Station. It had held frozen protein stock before the war, and it never gave up the cold. Everybody else who'd been billeted there had complained. I had personally listened to a Dennick sergeant complain about it for 11 minutes without stopping to breathe, which Dennick can do. The humans had been in that warehouse for 4 hours. They had strung a line across it and hung wet laundry. There was a smell. I need to be honest about this. There was a powerful smell, and it turned out to be food, some kind of protein paste with a spice compound in it that made my eyes water from the doorway, and a human was cooking it on one of the field ovens while another human argued with him about it in a tone I eventually learned to identify as affectionate. Somebody was asleep, sitting up back against a crate, mouth open, hands loose on his weapon. Asleep. 61 days into a siege, 4 hours after landing on a hostile moon in a cold warehouse, with the shelling audible in the distance. I stood in that doorway with my tablet and my scanner, and I felt something I did not have a word for, and still don't. Then a woman crossed the floor toward me. Gray hair, cut close. Not tall, barely a head over me, which is short for a human, and built like something that had been compressed. There was a burn scar across the back of one hand that had healed badly, ridged, ugly, and she used that hand freely, without any of the self-consciousness a Coalition officer would have had about visible damage. "You're the wire kid," she said. Her trade was terrible, every vowel in the wrong place. But she said it slowly, and she watched my face while she said it, which I later understood was not condescension. It was courtesy. "Septordinal Kevu Tamrel, Auxiliary Medical," I said. "Odolphen, Sergeant Major." She looked at my scanner. "You're here to poke us." "Baseline intake. It's mandatory. I have to log species-typical thresholds, damage tolerance, governor grade, and window." She was already turning away, already saying something to the room in Terran, and 41 humans looked up at me, and I understood, with a small cold feeling, that they had all stopped what they were doing to look at the small, damp person with the scanner. Then she turned back, and she said in trade carefully, like she'd practiced, "Just so you know ahead of time, our numbers are going to look funny." The first 6 were bad enough that I convinced myself the scanner was broken. Pain thresholds outside the calibration range. Not high, the range simply didn't have a slot for what it was reading, so it kicked the value out as an error. Blood oxygen debt tolerance that made no sense. Adrenal profile that looked, and I mean this literally, like a predatory animal from a high-gravity world. And then on every single scan, the same red flag in the same field. Governor not DETCTED. Verify sensor placement. I verified sensor placement. I verified it 41 times. I put the ring against the base of the skull of 41 human beings, and I got the same result every time. And by number 12, my hands had started shaking, and by number 20, a human woman named Ren Castellanos, who was their medic, put her hand on my shoulder and said something I didn't catch. Number 34 was Corporal Bo Tsang, and he was eating, and he asked me if I was okay. I said, "You have no governor." He kept chewing. He looked at his sergeant major who was across the warehouse checking a weapon. He looked back at me. "Yeah," he said, "it doesn't take, never has." "That's not," I couldn't get the sentence out. "That's not a thing that can be true. Every species." "Yeah," he said again, and something happened in his face, a kind of tiredness that I have never seen on any other species and have seen on almost every human I've known since. "We know, believe me, we know." I ran to medical. I want to say I walked. I ran. I ran 900 meters through the ash with the tablet clutched to my chest, and I came into the triage bay so fast I knocked over a rack of sealed dressings, and I put the tablet in front of Chief Surgeon Aminette Rokersh, who was a Denic, and who was the finest doctor I have ever worked with, and who was, on that day, entirely and completely wrong. She read it. She read it twice. Her second lid came down, which is what Denic do when they're annoyed. "Sensor fault," she said. 41 times. "A software fault, then. The human baseline package is old. It probably doesn't recognize the governor model." She handed the tablet back. "They're an obscure member species with obsolete equipment. Their governors are probably a legacy design our scanner reads as absent. Log it as unverified and move on. We have 406 wounded and the water plant is still in Vaunt hands." "Chief," I asked one of them. "He said it doesn't take," he said. "Septordinal," she said it quietly. "Do you know what you're suggesting? You're suggesting a coalition member species field soldiers with no failsafe. That is a treaty violation of the highest order. It is a war crime. It is the single thing we all agreed, all of us, 11,000 years ago, never to do to our own people." She took the tablet back out of my hands and set it face down. "If you file that report, it will be investigated. There will be an inquiry. The 41 soldiers who arrived today will be pulled off this moon and detained pending charges." I opened my mouth. "And then," she said, "we will have 41 fewer soldiers on this moon." I remember the sound of the shelling starting again in the north. I remember thinking about the number 4,000 and how much smaller it was than 14,000. I said, "Log it as unverified." She said, "Log it as unverified." I have thought about that conversation every day of my life since. I do not know that either of us was wrong. That's the worst part. I have never been able to decide. Here is what I noticed over the next 4 days, in no particular order, because that is how noticing works. It doesn't arrive in order. It arrives in pieces, and you only assemble it afterward when it's too late to be useful. They ate during shelling. Not defiantly. Not to make a point. A round would come down 800 meters out and the whole warehouse would jump and dust would sift from the roof beams and a human would look up, assess, decide it wasn't close enough to matter and go back to their bowl. I watched a private named Aurelio Enkemdirim make tea in the middle of a barrage. Actual tea. He had a small metal cup, and he heated water on Adeline's exhaust manifold, and he stood there in the doorway watching the flashes on the northern range like a man watching weather. He offered me some. It was hot and bitter and had too much sugar in it, and it is, to this day, the best thing I have ever drunk. They named everything. The walker was Adeline. Their 2 vehicles were Gladys and the Mistake. Their heavy weapon, a crew-served ballistic thing that fired a projectile as long as my forearm, was named Persephone, and the crew talked to it, not superstitiously, conversationally. "Come on, girl. There we go. Don't you do that to me." Their engineer, a man everybody called Tack, had scratched tally marks into the stock of his weapon, and when I asked, he said they were the days since they'd left home. There were 406 of them. They slept badly, and they slept anyway. They complained constantly, loudly, about the food, the cold, the ash, the officers, the coalition, each other. I had been raised to believe that complaint was the first symptom of a unit about to break, because in Selshiri units and in Denic units and in Morkal units, that is exactly what it is. It took me a very long time to understand that for humans, complaint is a load-bearing structure. It's how they hold the weight. The day a human unit stops complaining, run. And they touched each other constantly. I don't mean anything by that. I mean that they were forever in physical contact, a hand on a shoulder, a shove, an arm around a neck, sitting pressed together against a crate for warmth when there was plenty of room to spread out. Ren Castellanos slept with her back against Tack's back. Sergeant Major Fenn walked the length of the warehouse every evening and put her hand on the top of every single head, every one, 40 other people, and said nothing, and kept walking. On the third night I asked her about it. I'd gotten brave. She thought about it a while. Head count, she said. Then she looked at me and she said, "You're on the count now too, wire kid." And she put her scarred hand on the top of my head, and she walked on, and I stood in that cold warehouse for a long time without moving. Day 65, the water plant. I need to give you the tactical situation, and I'll be quick, because the tactical situation only matters to explain why what happened was impossible. Tallow Station drank from an aquifer. The aquifer was pumped and filtered at a hardened plant 4 kilometers north of the town, on the lower slope, and on day 19 of the siege, the Vaunt had taken it. Since then the town had been on rationed recycling, which is survivable in the way that any slow poison is survivable. We had tried to retake the plant twice. The first attempt was a coalition mechanized company. The Vaunt had emplaced 2 harrow nests in the filtration towers, which meant crossing 400 meters of open ash with no cover, and the company took 40% casualties in the first 90 seconds. Standard doctrine at that point is to break contact. Doctrine exists because it's correct. They broke contact. The second attempt was a night infiltration by Morcall special troops, who are the finest infiltrators in the arm and who I would follow anywhere. The Vaunt had seeded the approach with pressure-sensitive burst mines. 11 Morcall went in. 2 came back and both of them were carried. The plant was, by every model, unassailable with the forces on that moon. Sergeant Major Fenn spent 2 days looking at it through an optical scope from a rooftop, lying perfectly still under an ash tarp, coming down only to eat. Then she went to Coalition Command and told them she'd take it that night with 38 people. I wasn't in the room. I've heard 4 versions. The one I believe is from a Dennick staff captain who was there and who told me, years later at a bar on a station I won't name, that command laughed. Not cruelly, kindly, the way you laugh when a child offers to carry something heavy for you. And that Fenn waited for the laughing to stop. And then said, "We're not asking permission. We're telling you where we'll be so you don't shell us." They took me with them. Wire, obviously. They needed a hard line for the assault because the Vaunt were running a broad-spectrum jam over the whole northern approach, and a hard line means somebody has to physically pay it out behind the advance, and there was exactly one person on that moon whose whole life was paying out line, and he was chest-high and damp and 22 standard. Ren Castellanos fitted me with human body armor. It was comically large. She cut it down with a knife, right there, ruining a piece of equipment worth more than my family's house, and when I made a sound of protest she said, "It's not worth anything if you're dead," which is a sentence I still think about. We went out at 2:10. Ash, always ash. It muffles sound in a way that's disorienting. You hear things late and from the wrong direction. Hesper hung over us, that bruise purple, and gave just enough light to see the shape of the man in front of you and nothing else. We crossed 3 kilometers in 2 hours. I have laid line under fire. I had never in my life laid line behind troops who moved like that. They didn't move fast. They moved unrelentingly. The Morcall are faster. The Morcall are ghosts. Humans move like water finding a crack, no urgency in any individual step and no possibility of stopping. At the 800-meter mark we went flat, and Tack went forward alone with a length of hooked wire, and spent 40 minutes clearing a lane through the burst mines by hand. By hand, lying on his stomach, in the dark, with ash falling on him. I lay behind a rock outcrop and watched him work, and I understood, for the first time, that the humans had not brought Odeline because they had no better machine. They had brought Odeline because they knew that some things a machine will not do slowly enough. At 4:30, 400 meters from the filtration towers, Fen touched my shoulder and put her mouth next to where she'd guessed my auditory membrane was and said, "Kids, stay here. Anything comes back that isn't us, run home, don't wait." I said, "Yes, Sergeant Major." She said, "You did good." Then she stood up in the open, 400 meters from two harrow nests, and started walking. I will tell you exactly what I saw, and I will not embellish, because it does not need it. They did not charge. That's the first thing. Every dramatization gets this wrong. Nobody screamed and nobody sprinted. 38 humans stood up out of the ash in a loose line and walked toward the towers at a steady pace, weapons up, and the ash swallowed them from the knees down so it looked like they were wadding. The Vaunt saw them at 310 meters. The harrow nests opened up. If you have never heard a Vaunt harrow gun, it does not sound like a weapon. It sounds like tearing cloth, amplified until it's inside your skull, and it puts out a stream of accelerated ferrous flechettes at a rate that is designed on purpose by people in a room to overwhelm the damage signal threshold of any organism that crosses it. That's the doctrine. You don't have to kill an enemy. You have to hurt them past the drop point. The governor does the rest, and the field is clear. It is, when you write it down, an extremely humane doctrine. The line went down at 300 meters, all of them prone in the ash. And that was the moment. I remember it perfectly. I remember the cold in my hands and the taste of grit. That was the moment I thought, good. They're not stupid. They're going to break contact. Then the line got up. Not all at once, in pieces, 2 here, 3 there. One man got to his knees and stayed there a second with his head down, and then he was up. They came up out of the ash gray from head to foot, so caked they didn't look like people anymore. They looked like the ground had decided to stand, and they kept walking. 250 meters. Down again, up again. The harrow nests changed pitch. I know that sound now. That's the sound of a gunner going to sustained fire, which you are not supposed to do because it burns the barrel, which you only do when the target is not behaving. 200 meters. Somebody in the human line was hit. I saw the shape of it, the way a body twists, and went down and did not get up, and 2 others stopped, and one of them dragged him back and the other one stayed with the wounded man, kneeling in the open in that fire, working on him, while the rest of the line kept walking. That was Ren. 150 meters. At 100 meters, Persephone opened up from a spur of rock behind me. They'd walked her up in pieces and assembled her in the dark, and I hadn't even known, and put 4 rounds into the base of the left tower, and the tower leaned and the harrow nest in it stopped tearing. The right nest kept firing. 50 meters. And I saw a man. I found out later it was Bo Tsang, the one who'd asked if I was okay, the one with the mole where his governor should have been. I saw him reach the base of the right tower with his left arm hanging in a way an arm does not hang, and he took something off his belt with his right hand, and he used his teeth to prime it, and he threw it into the tower door. And then he sat down in the ash. And the tower went quiet. It took 19 minutes. 19 minutes from the first shot to the moment Sergeant Major Odolphin's voice came over the hard line I had laid, calm, slightly bored, and said, "Plant is ours. Send the pump crew. Watch the northeast corner. There's still a live one, and I'd rather he came out on his own." 19 minutes. I ran the line up. It's my job. Nobody told me to. I came across the 400 meters of ash with the spool bouncing on my back and my lungs full of grit, and I found them. 29 of them still standing, 6 wounded, 3 dead. 3. Against 2 emplaced harrow nests, across 400 meters of open ground, in an assault that Coalition Command had modeled at 94% casualties for a mechanized company. I found Boatsang sitting against the tower with his arm in his lap, and Ren Castellanos was cutting his sleeve off and he was talking. He was talking. He was telling her about somebody named Marissa and a boat, and Ren was saying, uh-huh, and her hands were moving very fast, and there was so much blood in the ash that it had gone black and made a paste. I stood there with my spool. Bo saw me. His eyes took a second to find me, and he lifted his good hand about 4 centimeters off his thigh, which was as far as it went, and he said something in Terran that Ren translated for me later, when things were quieter, and which I have carried for the rest of my life. He said, "Hey, wire kid, you came all the way up here." Like I was the one who'd done something. Word got to Talos Station before we did. I came down the slope behind the stretchers at 700 and there were people on the roofs. Civilians. Soldiers. A whole Denic platoon standing in the street in the ash, silent, watching 38 humans, 29 walking, 6 carried, 3 wrapped, come back with the water plant. Nobody cheered. I want that in the record because when this becomes a story people always put cheering in it. There was no cheering. There was a silence so total that I could hear Adeline's foot servos clicking, and I could hear a wounded human breathing, and I could hear, far away, the low hum of the ladder holding the sky. Because everyone in that street had done the arithmetic. They had all seen the same reports I had. They knew what a Heroness does. They knew what the drop point is. Every single person standing in that ash had spent their entire life inside a universe where a sufficiently hurt soldier stops, and 38 soldiers had just walked into a wall of sustained flechette fire and come out the other side, and the wall was the thing that broke. A Morkal captain, one of the 2 survivors from the second attempt, still on crutches, stepped out into the road. He was very old for a Morkal. He had scars on his throat. He stopped Sergeant Major Fenn in the street. He said in trade and his voice cracked on it, "How?" And Fenn, gray with ash, with somebody else's blood dried up her forearm, having not slept in 31 hours, looked at him with what I can only describe as apology. She said, "We don't stop." He said, "Nobody can." "I know," she said, "I'm sorry." And she walked past him, and she went into the warehouse, and she started the head count. The Vaunt broadcast that night. They did it on the open channel, unencrypted, which was itself a message. Their speaker of compact was a Harrow general named Ossic Valthrin, and I have a copy of the recording, and I've listened to it more times than is healthy. He was not angry, that's what nobody expects. He was careful. He spoke slowly, the way you speak when you're trying to keep something out of your voice. He said that the compact had reviewed gun camera footage from the northern position. He said that the compact had identified the assaulting force as Terran. He said, and here his voice does a thing, a small hesitation, and I have played that hesitation for audiences and watched their faces change. He said that the compact maintained archives from the Wither Line campaigns of 312 years ago, in which Terran forces had been engaged, and that those archives had been classified as unreliable for 3 centuries. And then he said, "We are reclassifying them." He said the coalition had fielded, on Belarrow, soldiers without governors. He accused us, the coalition, all of us, of a war crime, of mutilating our own troops, of stripping the mercy out of 41 people and pointing them at his soldiers. And he demanded, in the name of 11,000 years of treaty, that we surrender the humans to compact custody for medical examination and repatriation. I was in the command bunker when that came in, running a line, on my knees under a console. I heard Chief Surgeon Rokersh say, into the silence, very quietly, "They think it was done to them." And I heard our own general staff argue for 2 hours about whether to hand them over. 2 hours. I told Fenn. I shouldn't have. I was auxiliary medical. I had no clearance. I had heard it under a console with a spool of wire on my back. But I went to the warehouse at 300 and she was awake, because she was always awake, sitting on a crate with a mug of something and her weapon across her knees. And I stood in front of her, and I told her the Vaunt had demanded they be surrendered, and that command was considering it. She listened. She did not seem surprised. That was somehow the worst part. She said, "It's happened before." I said, "What?" And she told me, "Not much. Not all of it." She told me that in 90 years of coalition membership, humanity had been the subject of 11 formal inquiries into the treatment of its soldiers. That the first human ambassador to the assembly had spent 2 years explaining to a chamber that would not hear it that the socket at the base of a human skull is empty because human physiology does not have the thing the socket is for. That the tests had been run and rerun, and the results filed, and the results disbelieved, because a species without a drop point is not a species. It is an error, and the galaxy would rather believe in a war crime than an error. She said all of this in her terrible trade, with her mug going cold in her hands. Then she said, "You know what the worst part is, kid?" I said no. She said, "They're not wrong to be scared, they're just scared of the wrong thing." She turned the mug around. "They think we're weapons somebody made. We're not. Nobody made us. We just came out like this and we've had to live in it the whole time." She looked up and her eyes in that cold warehouse were very tired and very kind. "You want to know what a human is? A human is somebody who has to decide to stop. Every time. There's nothing in me that will do it for me. If I want to lie down, I have to choose it, with my whole mind, while everything in my body is screaming." She drank the cold thing in the mug. Bo made that choice at the base of a tower with one arm. Ren makes it 40 times a day, every time she has to leave one to save two. She set the mug down. "That's not a superpower, wire kid. That's just a bill, and we've been paying it since before we had a word for it." I did not know what to say. She stood up, and she went and did the head count. 40 hands on 40 heads and mine, and she went to sleep sitting against a crate with her mouth open. Command did not surrender them. I'd like to say it was principle. It was arithmetic. On day 68, 3 days after the water plant, the Vaunt stopped waiting. At 500, a compact orbital element cut the ladder. I was in the medical bay, and I felt it before I heard it. The whole moon felt it. 280 kilometers of monofilament under tension, severed at the 90-kilometer mark, and the low hum that had been under every sound in my life for 2 months simply stopped, and the silence where it had been was the loudest thing I have ever experienced. Then the sky came down. 90 kilometers of tether does not fall like a rope. It comes down in a long, lazy curve across the horizon, glowing for 11 minutes. People stood in the streets and watched it. Some of them prayed. A little Selshiri girl on a balcony below the medical bay window pointed at it with both hands, delighted, because she was 4 years old and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. It came down across the eastern flats, and the ash it kicked up turned the sky the color of an old wound and blotted Hesper out entirely. And under the cover of that, the Vaunt came. Everything they had. 9,000 Harrow troops, 200 armored elements, and the stepwalkers. I'd only ever seen the recordings, 40-meter articulated siege platforms that plant themselves, and shear a defensive line the way you'd take a knife to soft fruit. Coalition strength in Tallow Station on the morning of day 68. 3,100 effectives, no orbital support, no resupply, and a town with 4,000 civilians in it and nowhere to send them. I stood on the roof of medical with the ash falling, and I watched the Vaunt line come across the eastern flats like a tide coming in, and I found that I was not afraid, which frightened me more than fear would have. Then somebody put a hand on the top of my head. Fen was standing next to me. She had her weapon slung and she was eating a ration bar, and she was looking at 9,000 Harrow troops the way Enkemdirim had looked at the shelling, like weather. She chewed, she swallowed. She said, "Kid, I need you to lay me a line." I said, "Where?" And she pointed, with the ration bar at the breach in the eastern wall, at the 400 meters of open ground in front of it, at the exact place where the Vaunt line would fold around us and take the town and the 4,000 people in it. There, she said, right out front where they can see us. Below us in the street, 38 humans were forming up in the ash, in the open, in full view, with the tide coming in. And every soldier in Tallow Station had come out to watch them do it. Here is the thing nobody tells you about the worst day of your life. You spend most of it waiting. 9,000 Harrow troops were crossing the eastern flats, and it took them 4 hours, because armies are slow, because tides are slow, because the end of the world does not arrive. It approaches, at a walking pace in full view, while you stand there with a spool of wire on your back, and your mouth tastes like grit and you cannot think of a single useful thing to do with your hands. 4 hours. I laid the line in 20 minutes. Then I had 3 hours and 40 minutes to stand at the breach in the eastern wall and watch 38 human beings get ready to die in front of me. And I want to tell you about those 3 hours and 40 minutes, because everyone always wants the battle and nobody ever wants the waiting. And the waiting is where I learned everything I know. The breach was 200 meters wide. A Vaunt bombardment had opened it on day 43, and we'd spent 3 weeks trying to close it with rubble and prefabricated barrier, and one afternoon of very optimistic engineering. And none of it had held, because the ground under Tallow Station is volcanic scree, and it does not hold anything. So what we had was a gap, 200 meters of collapsed wall, sloping outward into 400 meters of open ash, with the whole eastern flats beyond it and the enemy coming across. Behind the breach, the market district, then 2 residential blocks, then medical, then the civilian shelters where 4,000 people were packed into cellars and drainage works and the deep vault of a grain silo in the dark, listening. Coalition Command put a Denic mechanized company on the northern flank, and a Morcall battalion on the southern, and every artillery piece we had left, 6, behind the market square. And in the breach itself, in the gap at the front, they put nobody, because you cannot put anybody in a 200-meter gap in front of 9,000 Harrow troops. Doctrine says you fall back through the streets and you make them pay for every house. Doctrine is correct. Doctrine has 11,000 years of dead people behind it saying so. At 7:40 on day 68, 38 humans walked out into that gap and started digging. I need you to see it the way I saw it. They did not dig fighting positions in a line. That's what I expected. That's what I would have done, what anybody would have done, a nice straight line, mutually supporting textbook. They dug in clumps, 3s and 4s, scattered across 200 meters in a pattern I could not read at all, some of them 15 meters apart, some of them almost touching. Tack walked the whole width of it twice with a stick, jamming it into the ground, listening to the sound it made, moving people 3 meters left, 4 meters back. The scree was loose. Some spots would hold a hole and some spots would collapse on you, and there was no way to know without putting a stick in the ground, and there was no machine on that moon that could have done it faster than a man with a stick. They put Persephone on the rubble of the wall itself, dead center, in the most exposed position in the entire town, because that was the only place she had a clean 200-degree field. And they put Adeline behind the line with the awning up. The awning, I want to be honest with you, at the time I thought it was madness. 9,000 troops coming and the humans unfolded a canvas awning off the back of a 6-legged mule and set up a field oven under it. Enkemderim made tea. For everybody. He came around the line with a pot and a stack of little metal cups and he poured for every single one of them, and they took the cups and drank standing in their half-dug holes watching the horizon, and he came all the way to the end of the line to me, and he poured me one too, and he said something in Terran and grinned, and I did not understand a word of it, and I understood all of it. Bitter, too much sugar, hot enough to hurt. I have had that tea in 11 systems since. I've paid absurd money for the right leaf. It has never once tasted the same, and I know exactly why. Boatsang came out to the line at 900, with his arms strapped across his chest. Ren saw him first. She came up out of her hole so fast she lost her helmet, and she went at him, and there was a conversation I could not follow but did not need to. Because a person shouting at someone they love sounds identical in every language that has ever existed anywhere. He stood there and took it, head down, nodding. And then he said one thing quietly, and Ren stopped. She stood there in the ash for about 4 seconds. Then she turned around and walked back to her hole and got in it and didn't look at him again. Later, much later, on a hospital ship, when there was nothing left to do but talk, I asked her what he'd said. He said, "You'd need 2 hands to carry me. I only need 1 to walk." She said it flatly, and then she laughed, a horrible cracked sound, and put her face in her hands. Boatsang, 34 years old, with 1 functioning arm and a mole where his governor should have been, dug a hole in the volcanic scree of Belarrow with 1 hand for 2 hours and 40 minutes. He did not ask for help. Nobody offered, which I did not understand then and understand now. Sergeant Major Fenn walked past him twice. The second time, she put her hand on the top of his head. At 10:10 the vaunt stopped. 2,000 meters out. The whole tide just halted. 9,000 Harrow troops, 200 armored elements, and behind them, folded down like sleeping insects, 6 step walkers. And a single vehicle came forward under a white pulse. Parley. The Morkal captain, his name was Cyril Ve, and I have never told anyone this, but I loved him a little. The way you love someone who is very old and very tired and still walking. Came down to the breach on his crutches to meet it, because he was the senior officer who could still stand up. And Fenn walked out with him. Nobody ordered her to. She simply climbed out of the ash and fell in beside him and matched her pace to his crutches, which is a small thing, and which I noticed, and which I have never forgotten. I laid a line so command could hear it. That's why I was there. That's the only reason I have this. The vehicle opened, and Harrow General Ossic Valthrin got out. I had never seen a vaunt up close. They are 2.5 meters. They are plated in a segmented dark carapace that grows in ridges as they age, so rank in the compact is literally worn on the body, and Valthrin's ridges went all the way down his spine and up over his skull like a crown. He had a translator collar. His mandibles ticked when he spoke, a sound like a clock. He looked at Anik Ve for a moment. Then he ignored him completely and looked at Odolphen. He was 3 times her mass. She came up to the middle of his chest. She had ash in her gray hair and a burned scar on her hand, and her thumbs hooked in her webbing, and she looked up at him with an expression I can only call polite. He said through the collar, "You are the Terran commander." Sergeant Major Fenn. That is not a command rank. No, she agreed, it isn't. The clock tick of his mandibles, he said, "I have come to offer terms." And Anik Ve on his crutches said, "Then offer them to me, General. I am not speaking to you," said Valthrin. And I want to be very precise about the recording here because I have listened to it 800 times, he said. I have come to look at them. He walked past them both. He walked past the parley line and out toward the breach, alone, unarmed, a Harrow general of the Vaunt Compact, 3,000 meters from his own army, and he stopped 40 meters from the human position, and he looked. 37 human beings in shallow holes in the ash looked back at him. Nobody shot him. That's the thing. 37 people with weapons and a legitimate target, and not one of them fired, because Fenn had not told them to, and because, I understand this now, every single one of them wanted him to see. He stood there for a long time. Then he came back, and his mandibles were not ticking anymore. They were still, and I have been told by a xenobiologist that stillness in the mandibles of a Vaunt is not calm. He said, "There are 37. 38, said Fenn. "One's behind the wall making tea. You have 3,000 effectives in this town. Behind you there are 4,000 civilians. I have 9,000. Tick, tick. The Compact does not want this town. The Compact wants the tether which is now on the ground and the aquifer which you have taken back at a cost I have reviewed with some care." He leaned down. He put his face level with hers, which for a vaunt is a gesture of extraordinary aggression, and she did not move a millimeter. "Give me the Terrans, all 41. Alive in compact custody, for medical examination and repatriation to a neutral world. And I will withdraw from Belarrow entirely, and I will not fire on this town again." There was a silence on the line. In the command bunker, 900 meters behind me, I could hear General Staff breathing. Fenn said, "That's a good offer." "It is an extraordinary offer," said Volthren, and something got into his voice through the collar, something the machine could not sand off. "It is more than your coalition would give me. I'm offering to end a siege for 41 soldiers of no strategic consequence. Tick. Do you understand what I am telling you, Terran? I am telling you that I have seen the footage from the northern position. I have seen a soldier with a severed brachial artery prime a charge with his teeth. I have watched it 200 times. My officers cannot watch it. 2 of them have asked for reassignment." He straightened up. "I am not offering terms because you are strong. I am offering terms because somebody did that to you, and I will not have my soldiers be the instrument of it, and I will not have 9,000 of them come home knowing what they had to do to make you stop." And Odell Fenn, 61 years old, 31 hours without sleep, 3 of her people wrapped in canvas behind the wall, did the last thing anybody expected. She reached up and pulled her collar down, and turned around, and showed him the back of her neck. "Look," she said. He looked. "Nothing's been taken out," she said. "There was never anything in there, not in me, not in my mother, not in anybody who ever lived on my world going back as far as we can dig." She turned back around and fixed her collar. "We didn't lose the thing, General. We never had it, that's all. That's the whole secret. There isn't any more to it than that." The clock stopped ticking entirely. Volthren said, very quietly, in a voice the collar rendered almost gently, "Then how do you bear it?" And Fenn said, "Badly." She said, "We bear it very badly. We've been bearing it badly for 200,000 years, and we're not any better at it than we were on the first day." She looked past him at the tide, at the 9,000, at the 6 folded step walkers. "There's 4,000 people behind me in a hole in the ground, and about 600 of them are kids. So no, you can't have us." She shrugged. Actually shrugged, a small human motion, a lifting of the shoulders. "I'm sorry. I know that's not what you wanted to hear. I'm sure you're a good man in whatever way your people mean it." Volthren stood there in the ash. Then he said something that was not translated. The collar clicked and produced nothing. And he turned and went back to his vehicle, and the vehicle went back across the flats, and at 11:04 the stepwalkers stood up. I asked, years afterward at an inquiry, what he'd said in that untranslated moment. They played it for a Vaunt linguist. She listened 3 times. She said it was not compact standard. It was a low-caste dialect from the marsh provinces of his homeworld, the kind you speak in the house, to family, and that it doesn't have a clean translation, and that the nearest she could get was, "Then I am about to do something very cruel, and it will not even work." The stepwalkers came first, because that is doctrine, and doctrine is correct. 40 meters. 4 legs, articulated, planting like a spider settling, and on the body a shear array that puts out a wave of directed pressure and harrow fire in a 180-degree arc. It is not designed to kill. It is designed to cross the drop point of every organism in front of it simultaneously, so the infantry can walk into a defensive position and find it asleep. That is what a stepwalker is for. It is a machine that makes an army lie down. 6 of them came across the flats, and I have never heard anything like the sound. Not loud. That's the thing. Six 40-meter machines walking on volcanic scree make a sound like enormous careful footsteps, and between the footsteps, nothing. Persephone opened up at 1,500 meters. The crew were named Reyes and Akanjo, and they had been talking to that gun since the day they landed, and they talked to her then. I could hear it on the hard line, because the hard line ran right past her, and I have that too. And it is the most human sound in my entire archive. Two people in the most exposed position on a doomed moon, with a 40-meter siege platform walking toward them, saying, "There we go. There we go. That's my girl. One more, come on, darling, one more." They put 9 rounds into the lead stepwalker's knee joint before it was in range to answer. It went down. It fell sideways across the flats, and the ash went up in a wall. The second one killed them. I saw it happen. The shear array swept the top of the wall, and Persephone came apart, and Reyes and Akanjo came apart, and the ash took it all, and there was nothing there anymore. And 35 human beings in shallow holes did not stop shooting for 1 second. That's when it started properly. I am not a soldier, and I will not pretend to describe a battle the way a soldier would. Here is what I have. Here is what a wire runner lying in a drainage culvert 40 meters behind the human line saw of the defense of Tallow Station. I saw the shear wave come across the ash and hit the human position, and I saw 35 people go flat. I saw them get up. Not all, never all, but I saw a woman named Holloway rise out of a collapsed hole with blood coming out of both ears and her nose and her mouth, and she was screaming, and she could not hear herself screaming, and she got her weapon up on the lip of the hole and fired at 9,000 Harrow troops. I saw Tack, the engineer, 406 tally marks, a man who cleared burst mines by hand, crawl 30 meters forward, under the wave, dragging a satchel charge and get under the second stepwalker's rear foot, and stay there while it planted itself on him. The charge went. The walker's foot went. The walker went down onto its face, and the shear array pointed at the ground and cut a trench 200 meters long in the flats. 4 left. I saw Aurelio Enkemderim, who had made me tea, who had a wife and a daughter on a station I have since visited and could not make myself enter, stand up in the open with a shoulder-launched anti-armor tube, and take a knee and wait, in the open, with Harrow fire coming for a clean shot at the third walker's sensor mast. He held that shot for 4 seconds. I counted. I was 40 meters behind him, and I counted, and I have never been able to stop counting it. 4 seconds is nothing. 4 seconds is a breath. 4 seconds in the open under sustained fire is a decision you make and remake 4 times. He took the shot. The mast came off. He was hit twice while the tube was still on his shoulder and once more on the ground, and he was reaching for his weapon when the fourth walker's wave came through, and after that I could not see him. 3 left. The Harrow troops hit the line at 11:40. 9,000 against 31. Here is the thing about Vaunt infantry doctrine that I did not understand until I was much older and had read too much. They do not close. They advance to the shear line, they saturate, they wait for the drop, and they walk in. Their entire training, their entire culture of war, every instinct in 9,000 bodies, is built around the certainty that after saturation the position will be asleep. They saturated the human position for 6 minutes. Then they walked in. And the position was not asleep. I have seen the gun camera footage. The Compact released it at the inquiry, all of it, unedited, because Volthren insisted, because he said the galaxy was owed it. I think he wanted us punished. I think, watching it now, that he wanted us to look. You see the ash, you see the shapes. You see a Harrow trooper come over the lip of a collapsed hole with his weapon low, casual. A soldier walking into a room where everyone has fainted, and you see a human come up out of that ash with a bayonet. The trooper's body camera is very stable for the first second because he is not afraid. He has never been afraid at this point in an assault, not once in his career. And then the camera moves the way a camera moves when a person is backing up. You can hear him on the audio. His mandibles are going so fast the microphone can't separate the clicks. There is 31 of that. 31 people who should have been unconscious, standing up out of the ash, gray from head to foot and going forward. The Harrow line broke at the breach. 9,000 troops. Their front rank turned around, and it is the most human thing I have ever seen a Vaunt do. They turned around and they pushed into their own second rank to get away, and the second rank did not know what was happening and held, and there was a crush in the gap 200 meters wide, and the humans went into it.